We're here at the Monument de la Renaissance Africaine in Dakar. This is the tallest statue in Africa. It's 171 feet, 52 meters, and speaks to high hopes for a continent so long held back by everything from geography to colonialism to the Soviet economic model enforced by Cuban troops. Now, when it was constructed, there were some objections from local imams that the Xi statue was a little too realistic. But if the message here is that African men are brave and handsome, African women are brave and beautiful, and African kids are brave and cute, I don't see a problem with that. But there are a couple of things about this statue that are a little bit concerning. And one of them is that it cost $27 million that people thought might possibly have been better spent alleviating poverty in the slums of Dakar. That one was not made better when President Post-WWII tried to divert some of the revenue from it to his own pocket, claiming intellectual property rights. Another matter of at least potential concern is that normally you like to have the event before you have the commemoration. They didn't paint Washington crossing the Delaware until after Washington had crossed the Delaware. And remember, bravery is not enough. Sometimes bravery takes the form of hunkering down and enduring, waiting for something better. Other times, bravery takes the form of creating a new and better world. Objections have also been raised simply on the grounds of taste, which does bring me to the question of whether there might be better ways to assert a rebirth of African authenticity than to have a North Korean outfit use a Soviet artistic style inspired by a German ideology. But the big problem that I want to address here, which is connected to that one, is the problem that the statue shows these Africans escaping from things that are trying to hold them back. And unfortunately, one of those now is a new green kind of imperialism in which do-gooders in Western countries are working very hard to deny Africans the ability to develop the energy resources that will make a true, indigenous, lasting, and meaningful Renaissance possible on this continent. And we're here to tell you about that. Hello, and welcome to this program and program series on energy, poverty, and the tragedy of good intentions, based on the Climate Discussion Nexus documentary In the Dark about energy poverty with a specific focus on Senegal and West Africa. I'm John Robson, and I'm joined in episode 1 in the studio by Magatte Wade, an entrepreneur, activist, and gadfly who grew up in Senegal and hosted us when we visited, and by Shannon Joseph, a civil engineer turned energy advocate and chair of Energy for a Secure Future, to talk about how often good intentions go terribly wrong when it comes to helping other people live better. From Soviet forced industrialization to Western green non-industrialization, it's just far too easy to make a bad situation worse. And I want to introduce this whole subject of energy poverty, Magatte, by asking you to tell again a story that you have told before. I first encountered it on Jordan Peterson's podcast, but it's also in the documentary, about your coming from Senegal to Germany as a young girl and discovering plumbing.
Yes. So yes, I was just I had just arrived in Germany, and there my mother would say, "Get into the shower," and I'm looking to her and being like, "Where is the bucket of hot water?" And really, that was because back home where I was raised by my grandma, when my parents migrated to Europe, when my grandma said, "Magatte, time for your shower," I'm like, "Yes, grandma," but then I knew that I had a good 45 minutes to an hour to go play and fool around some more because, I knew that my grandmother would have to get a stove of coal going. Once the coals are really on and hot, then she puts a pot of water on it, wait for it to boil. Then we would put that water into a bigger bucket, mix it with colder water so it's safer, skin temperature for me. And then somebody stronger than her would drag it to the shower area. And there, some 45 minutes to an hour later, I could proceed to finally take my shower with a small plastic pot taking from the big bucket back and forth to my body. That's what taking a shower meant. And here in Germany, my mom says, "Magatte, it's time for your shower." I'm thinking to myself, where is the bucket of hot water? I am not getting butt naked in this weather. It was cold. And so she's like, "Oh, come on, you silly, just jump in." I jump in the shower stall, turn the knobs around, the water is coming down. Turns out you can control the temperature, you can control the pressure. And I'm just thinking to myself, oh my God. And I really thought somebody was playing a bad juju on me, and I'm wondering where is this person hiding behind the wall doing all of this. And yeah, so it was my first introduction to yeah, running water in a home.
At the beginning of this inquiry into the wealth of nations. Whereas, Shannon, you're born in the first world, Montreal, Canada. You're a civil engineer. You're the kind of person who makes the water come out of the pipes. So, how did you become an energy advocate? What got you into development and this whole question of energy and poverty?
Well, I think when I was a young person, I was very interested in making the world a better place, like so many young people are. And I landed on civil engineering because I thought that was primarily a an engineering problem. Yeah, we need to just build, pipes in Africa and wells and power lines, and everything will be solved. And I guess my professional journey has taken me through lots of different spaces where I've come to the conclusion that actually people know how to build wells and people know how to build power lines. But for various reasons of politics, people don't always make the decisions or create the space to allow others to make the decisions. Um, that allowed people to have a higher quality of life, to have running water, to have reliable power. And but the good news is that because those are maybe not technical fixes, but human fixes, there's a way to address it. But that's how I got into this thing.
And it's interesting because I remember I was in high school and we were studying Italy and how southern Italy was poor and northern Italy was wealthy and industrial. And so they had this development plan for southern Italy and they did all the things the textbook says you should do. And it was like pouring water on sand. Absolutely nothing happened. And this got me thinking that there might be something wrong with the Orthodox approach. Starting with your insight that it's okay, they do actually know how to build things, but for some reason things don't get built. And then, oh, I know what we'll do. We'll come and help them build them. We will save these people from themselves. And of course, Africa's seen a lot of that, partly because it is the poorest continent. And it's not just been water on sand, it's almost been worse than that.
It's been worse than that because so it turns out that since the end of colonialism, so my country has been technically free since April 4th, 1960. So we're like 65, 66 years into it now. April 4th will be 6 years, 66 years. And you look at most of these African nations, and we still are the poorest region in the world. Things are not getting better for the most part. And so the world has been looking at this and thinking, "Oh, gee, isn't it terrible? Let's give them, aid." And but the problem is not only this aid has not worked, but it also has come with some very bad consequences. Anywhere from creating a culture of dependency where agency is most needed, you are creating a dependency which is the opposite of agency, to also incentivizing corruption as well as leaders who never want to live. Because if who wants to leave behind these trillions of dollars that so far we've been spending on the problem? Who does? And then halfway across the world, you have all of these aid agencies and NGOs who are all like little leeches onto the system, sucking from this money. It's not going anywhere. So it's not just we're throwing good money after bad, but on top of that, we are promoting very toxic mentalities as well as systems, especially in the form of corruption.
And it's interesting, Shannon, when we were corresponding, setting up the program, you talked about having worked in energy poor places, and you mentioned Japan and Peru. And I did a bit of a double take. Japan, wait a minute, it's one of the world's biggest economies. But of course, Japan is very energy poor, and yet it's a very rich country. And Peru is very energy poor, and it's a poor country. So why are they so different apart from Japan never got foreign aid?
Oh, interesting. Yes. So they're different because Japan decided to be a country that built an economy on partnerships. So you're right. Japan is, I think, about 13% energy self sufficient. That means, and depending on the fuel, maybe they're 5% self sufficient. So they've had to import energy from friends and allies around the world for a very long time. Today, Japan imports natural gas, for example, from 17 different countries. They have that diversity of suppliers to protect themselves from anything going wrong in any of those countries. But Japan was able to use that to do a couple of things which remain true today. One is that they import more energy than they need. And that ensures that energy for the people who do things on the ground, whether it's manufacture cars or chips or all the many things Japan makes for the world, that they have access to affordable energy. And Japan ends up exporting the surplus that they take in. But the key thing is that they have secured energy supply and that they have built an economy on making things. And in that, they've leveraged, the education of their people and resourcefulness and a stable and trustworthy system of contracts and property and all of the things that are important and soft, but are fundamental to making an economy work.
Okay, and
But
I'm
it's
going to get you to hold
underpinned
the
by.
thought on Peru. We have to go to break. We'll come back and see what's different there after this. Welcome back. In our first segment on energy poverty, among other things, Shannon was talking about Japan and how they did it right. So, what does it look like in a place where it doesn't work? What does it look like in Peru?
Um, so Peru, when I lived there, had areas of the country that had power failures. It also had energy areas of the country that had water not working all day. And Peru didn't have the same, I think, strategy and has had different kinds of issues with their governance that have led them to be maybe less attractive to capital, less certain for certain developments to happen. When I went to Peru, for example, Canadian mining companies were there. There were massive protests against the companies, which can scare away investments from other companies. So Japan has never been a place that scared away investment. Japan has been a place focused on attracting investment and having the fundamentals in place, including having adequate energy supply.
So, of course, some people will say, well, during the 1930s, Japan maybe went on the wrong path. So we should concede that there was a period in their
Oh,
history where they're
I'm talking about post World War II.
Yeah, they apparently learned a lesson, which is one of these things that more of us really ought to be doing when it comes to energy. Because again, your story just about the beginning, where what the shower is like, and what your grandmother's life is like, is a microcosm of how difficult life is for so many people in so many parts of the world, and so much Western development policy, especially once climate change became a big thing, isn't helping them out. It's trapping them in it. And most of us, unlike you, will never go and see it. It's just like that's happening to somebody else, and we can fantasize that their lives are great because they don't have energy. But that's not the reality, is it?
No, it's not the reality. And again, it goes back to the fact that if you want to, the only way to fight poverty is to build prosperity. And as we know, the entrepreneurs are the ones who build prosperity. So what Japan has done right compared to Peru is that Japan has put in place the two key ingredients to building prosperity, which is on one end, the business environment that Shannon was talking about, making themselves investment friendly and welcoming the rest of the world in the form of foreign direct investment. That's on one side. And then on the other side, yes, they might not have the best resources of, naturally speaking, of energy, but they had the means to go get it wherever they found it from. So they put in place economic freedom, and they put in place also access to affordable, reliable, abundant energy sources. That's what allowed Japan to make it. Peru did not do that. Peru went for Marxist socialist ideas, which definitely don't put in place good business environments and have a very bad attitude towards business, which is the only force that can do this. And at the same time, even if they had tons of natural resources in the form of energy sources, they just don't have the money it would take to make something out of that by themselves.
Yeah.
We go back to the same issues of lack of economic freedom together with energy in order to allow for human flourishing.
Yeah, and when you look at a place like Peru and you look at poverty and the consequences of poverty for people in terms of not having safe drinking water and shortened lifespans and diseases that are rarities in the modern world, where on the list of Peruvians' problems would you list? We think it may have gotten half a degree warmer in the last 50 years if you have thermometers in a city. Like how high does that rank?
I don't want to kind of only focus on Peru here. There's lots of countries around the world that don't have all the energy they need. And when you don't have electricity and it's, 40 degrees Celsius, and that's not Peru, that might be a country like Vietnam or the Philippines, in a hot summer, power goes out. All you want is the air conditioning. And I think that we talk about sometimes Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You don't get environmental protection until you meet people's needs. And people around the world want to have a better quality of life. And they know that keeping the electricity on is the thing that's going to allow them to cool their homes, have safe food, have internet, be able to read in their home when the sun sets. These are all fundamental things that end up top of lists for individuals, for parents, when they think about how do we have a better life.
Yeah, I mean, I'm even thinking about, for instance, the civil rights in the United States. And one of the reasons it happened was that a couple of decades earlier, there'd been rural electrification. And this had brought a world to poor Southern Blacks who had been so isolated and had never thought to themselves things might be different. And then it, it starts to open up for them. And again, you see, it's amazing how often the critical thing is energy, that everything else turns on energy.
Mhm. Yeah, people forget, people see other people having things and are like, why? Somebody in the developing world can look on the internet and see how we live and think, why do they have this? Did they take it from us? All kinds of things are part of the discourse about why is life different here than somewhere else. But at the end of the day, we affordable energy is the thing that makes everything work. It's the reason, all of us on this show don't spend our days farming. There are machines now run on fuel that can plow fields for us. And when we get back to what are the fundamentals that make things work, we can have people not turn against each other or history or whatever and start thinking, how do we practically solve this? How do we get affordable energy? And then how do we build the other things that make people build the infrastructure in our countries that we need to do the other things in the economy?
Yeah, and again, as a part of the industrialization of the first world, and Henry Ford invents the Model T, and there's all kinds of stories, more social mobility and the effect it had on family. But in rural America, very often people would buy one of these cars, put it up on blocks, and put a drive belt around the rear axle to power the well, to power the sawmill. And again, the backbreaking labor, I think it's one of the things that people who don't see poverty firsthand, other than, sort of homeless poverty, maybe in first world cities, but rural poverty of the traditional kind, they don't understand how hard it's really hard work being poor because you don't have mechanical energy.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and then you're carrying things on your head and you're spending hours gathering things. And and that's a life again that I think that if you're going to be a do-gooder, should think very carefully how you're doing good. I don't know, because you should have went through the trajectory from the standard development theory to the very non-standard development theory.
hmm Yes, and today the do-gooders, both in the developed world and in the developing world, want to get us to stop using certain types of energy. Let's stop using fossil fuels. Let's only use wind. Let's only use solar. More recently, they've become more open to nuclear power. But here's the truth when you look at the numbers. Since the beginning of human history, our energy use was kind of like a low number for centuries. Then we figured out how to access modern forms of energy, and our energy use just went up and up and up and up. And we never stopped using wood. We just used a whole bunch of fuel and then a whole bunch of nuclear. And then we've added in wind and solar, even though they're still very small amounts of the global energy mix. But the point is, to have the high quality of life for all the people we have in the world, you just need more. And now that we want to have AI and data centers, these things are massive users of energy. But they, are creating all these new opportunities for delivering healthcare and education and all the things we're promised with AI. But all of those things rest on reliable energy, a lot of it being available all the time. And so what I'm happy about is we're starting to move away from this idea of substitution, especially substitution with sources of energy that can't work all the time. When the sun sets or when the wind stops blowing, you still have that demand and you need something to supply it. And we're really talking about energy addition and then, managing the costs and benefits of different technologies, because not everything works everywhere. But what's definitely critical everywhere is to have the access.
Right. So there's nothing romantic about living in grinding poverty, which brings us to this question, which we're going to revisit in the series again and again. Why are people stuck in it when we have the technical capacity, certainly, and it even seems like the fiscal capacity to get them out of it? And so when we return, we're going to look at well meaning Western policy gone badly wrong. Okay, then. If poverty is so bad, and if people around the world are willing to work hard to make better lives for themselves and for their kids, why is so much of the world still poor? And in this segment, we're going to look at a surprising answer that a lot of it is because well meaning Westerners don't trust the poor to judge their own situation and find their own solutions, especially where climate change is concerned. Because a great big part of the problem right now is that Western development aid, which is enormous, especially compared to the resources of a country like Senegal, is obsessed with this notion that hydrocarbon energy is going to destroy the planet. And we impose this on Africans in particular because they can't afford to say no to us.
You said it. Africa is the poorest region in the world. And I will never say it enough. He who makes the gold makes the rules. And so, insofar as rich nations are the ones with the money, they're rich, they somehow along the way have decided that climate alarmism is the main concern and that the solution to that is net zero, which means we have to cut fossil fuels almost from overnight. Then there goes a mandate. So then they tell themselves and the rest of the world, this is what we need to do. The Chinese are like, you're crazy. We're not going to do that because we don't have to. And we know it's crazy. The Indians are saying the same thing. You're crazy and we don't have to listen to you. So we're just going to continue. But the Africans are, for the most part, many of us are thinking you're crazy and we can't not follow you because you're our financiers. That's what you have right now.
Yeah, and if you look at the list of development agencies or international organizations like the OECD that are very much into development, they're not just an enormous number of them with huge resources, but they're kind of an interlocking set of people. They meet together, they talk together, they think similarly. And when it comes to lending to poor countries, one of the things they think is no fossil fuels, not even natural gas.
So, it's interesting. People forget how you get to build things. And one of the ways to build things is that you need a loan. Because if you're going to, build a power plant, for example, you're not going to get any revenues from selling electricity um, before you build it. And so you need lending. And if you're a developing country, you need a lot of lending because these are very expensive projects. And so countries turn to the World Bank, the Asia Development Bank, all these international organizations who all take their cue from discussions at the G20 and discussions at the G7. And a lot of those places, they'll come up with things like, we're going to get off coal by 2030, and we're going to be net zero by 2050. And therefore, we're going to have a net zero financing initiative, et cetera, et cetera. And these policies ripple down into development agencies. And so when you're, let's say, Vietnam and you want to build a power plant, you'll go to this agency and you'll say, hi, we want to build a power plant. We want to build some LNG intake. And the agency will say, well, we're sorry, we can't lend you this money because we don't do fossil fuel anymore. You should definitely build wind power. To which Vietnam and many other countries can respond, well, thank you for this idea, but we actually don't have a lot of good wind resources. And we actually have a monsoon season, which means that if we did solar, there would be months when there would be not enough solar output, and batteries don't last months. Can you please let us build what we need to build? And unfortunately, there's been all kinds of kind of hangups in getting this done. Interestingly, as Europe has been squeezed on natural gas, which was an important part of their energy mix, and that's happened because of Russia's war with Ukraine, they've changed their tune, certainly within Europe, about whether natural gas is a transition fuel or a long term fuel, something that they can use. So there's been a softening on gas in some places. Those same banks didn't want to fund nuclear power because nuclear was apparently dirty. A year ago, they all decided, no, we like nuclear. And so now they will fund a nuclear project through these development agency lending. And I'm hopeful that they'll change their mind on gas too, because gas is doesn't have some of the kind of costs and safety risks that might be associated with nuclear projects, especially in developing countries. And gas is readily available. Countries like Canada want to sell it. For us to sell it, we need Vietnam to be able to buy it. And for Vietnam or the Philippines or India to buy these projects, they need to be able to build the infrastructure to use it. And so it doesn't make any sense for a country like Canada to say to another country, oh, don't build this stuff, when number one, they need it and they know other solutions don't work as well. And number two, we need them to have it so that we can build our projects and get them the energy they need and employ our people and all the mutual benefit that comes from these kinds of projects. So there's a double whammy of following some of the activist ideas on climate and not taking a practical approach.
And that's good news actually, because she'd mentioned, you go to the lending agency and they say no, but then you go to the one next door and the one next door, and they all seem to think in very similar terms. So maybe the upside is if one of them gets sensible, maybe more of them will, because it's been kind of a mental gridlock.
Well, yes. And while that mental gridlock is happening, and some of these developing nations are still saying, and we still need a better energy mix, well, what happens is you're throwing them straight into the arms of China and into the arms of Russia and into the arms of, people, those type of governments, that it is funny that it's these other nations that are saying, we don't want to finance you if you're gonna build fossil fuels related infrastructures. They're always saying, oh, we have an issue with the CCP or we have an issue with the Russian government. But by doing this, you're basically pushing all the developing nations into the arms of China, of the Chinese CCP, as well as, the Russian government. And so then we're trapped now into other issues around geopolitical issues. So the whole thing is convoluted.
It was amazing how much was wrong with it. And it was when we were in Senegal, again, it was my first time ever in Africa, and it was very interesting in all kinds of ways, including we saw the Senegal River, right? If you're in Senegal, you should see the Senegal River. And you think, well, why don't Africans develop hydropower? And the answer is the Senegal River was nice to look at, but it wasn't Niagara Falls, right? It's not fast flowing. And a lot of this is to let local people make their own decisions about circumstances that you may actually understand very poorly. I mean, even the development agencies, but certainly the typical kind of activist doesn't really understand, I think, what's on the ground in any number of these countries, from the energy poor nations of Southeast Asia to the ones in Africa.
But this is a problem we have, and you're touching onto something else that's very important, and why I very much celebrate the work of, people like Shannon and her organization. The problem you have right now into this world of those who are thinking about what needs to happen with the developing world from the standpoint of a developed nation, supposedly, we have a lot of biases in terms of the people who work in these organizations. Very few of them will have the courage to come out and put out the research that people like Shannon are putting out and making connecting the dots that they're connecting. And so this has been an impediment on the whole thing. So we need more people like Shannon doing the type of work she does, coming up with the type of research they come up with to kind of counter the other narrative. The other narrative is very strong, it's dominant. And as long as it remains that way, it's just not going to trickle down in terms of action for what needs to happen on our side of the world. So this, to me, has been a big problem. Mainstream media is very biased towards non-business, and also they're more onto climate alarmism than they are into the well-being of human beings right now. And that I think is a huge problem that we're not talking about enough.
Yeah, and it's an interesting illustration. Once again, the problem in some ways with development theory isn't too little government money, it's too much. That the politicians are buying what they want, not the kind of things that people like you are putting out of much smaller organizations than, say, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
All right. I just think that people, you're right, John, that people think they know what can work, or they think we have a solution. And one of my favorite thinkers is Tom Sowell, and he said there are no such thing as solutions; there are only trade-offs. And the fact is that all of any technology we might use has an environmental, and economic, and social trade-off, and people don't think about it in these terms. They're like, "Oh, now we have a zero emitting energy. That's great." But that zero emitting energy requires this much tons of material, which will involve this much mining, and who's going to mine it, and where does it happen, and what are the human rights, and does it work all the time? And if it doesn't, how will we pay for the other energy when it's not working? And all these very complex things that the United Nations or big central agencies can't think through for Senegal or for Vietnam. Only the people who are there, they care the most about it working. And the people who want to build a factory, some of these countries in Asia have all kinds of ambitions around building their manufacturing, but they don't have enough energy. They're thinking through, what is it going to take for us to do this? And I wish that some of those agencies had a bit more humility about their own understanding, as you say, about what's going on in these places, and take seriously the if analysis done by people in the Philippines or in Senegal or wherever else about this is what we know we need and what will actually work. Please be our partner in success instead of trying to make us do something no rich country in the world has done.
Humility. That's the perfect transition to the break, because when we come back, we want to talk about what can actually be done. What are the practical steps? And I think that learning a little humility and keeping our noses out of other people's business is very high on that list. Welcome back. In the final segment of our first episode, we're looking at what well-meaning foreigners can do or not do to help Africans, as well as Asians and Latin Americans, and for that matter, poor people at home, to build better lives. And I'm thinking the first thing is take a bit of that aid money, buy a bunch of books by Thomas Sowell, and mail them to themselves. Because it is extraordinary the degree to which we're persisting in policies, including not believing in trade-offs, that have failed. They're not failing, they've failed. It's been, as you say, 60 years of this. At some point, surely we draw lessons.
At some point, surely we draw lessons. But again, I would like to say follow the incentives. As long as those making these decisions or promoting these decisions are not, are not suffering from these decisions, it's going to continue. And I go back to the fact that we have had a certain type of people speaking on these issues, all very much like this with each other in terms of what they're saying about and the type of research that they conduct. And I still argue, why is it that at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, we haven't had all of these years people like Shannon and doing the type of work she does? Why is it that her voice has not been out there? So there is an issue here, and we've seen it about almost everything when it comes to poverty in Africa. There are certain voices that are being promoted. There is a certain narrative that's just the lay of the land. And I believe it doesn't come out of nowhere. It's because, again, it's a matter of incentives. Trillions of dollars have been unleashed thanks to poverty in Africa. If you think that industry is willing to go away, you need to think again. And so that's what we have right now. And we need these very powerful and courageous voices from both sides of this, both in the developed nations and in the developing nations, the voices who know the reality and know what to do, they need somehow to be empowered. And that's what hopefully we're doing here, all of us together here. People back on the ground are doing, but I, again, will argue that if this doesn't become the dominant narrative, the actions will not follow. And that's pretty much where I'm at with this right now. The empirical evidence is here. We know what needs to be done, starting from the people, from these nations themselves. They know what they need. The data is supporting it. What's stopping it? What's stopping it?
Yeah, and unquestionably entrenched interest, right, including governments in poor countries that get so much of their revenue from foreign aid. And frankly, they're eating steak, right? They're doing quite nicely. So in a sense, like normally I would ask you what we should do, but actually I'm going to ask you, Shannon, right now, your top 3 things we shouldn't do if we want to see misdevelopment or sluggish development turn into dynamic growth in poor countries. What do we stop doing?
I think that we stop being prescriptive about technologies, and allow countries to pick a technology that works well for them when it comes to energy, and to pursue the partnerships, the trade partnerships that will help them get the energy they need. I think that's a first thing. I think a second thing is to stop. I don't know. I feel like you've overly constrained me. I think once we stop telling people what to pick, then we need to start listening. And, different countries are trying to pursue different kinds of economic goals. And we should be thinking about how do we trade with them to pursue those goals? Because as I said, if you're a country that wants to build things to buy our energy, that's another customer for Canada that creates jobs for Canadians, for our steel producers, and there's a whole kind of ripple effect that happens when something happens. And so we need to move out of this aid mindset into a trade mindset. So maybe that's the thing to stop. Stop thinking aid and start thinking trade. Um, and then I think the other thing to stop doing is to stop thinking that we need to be looking out until solving the problems of the world, because nobody here knows enough about any given place out there to tell them what to do. And I would then add, we should really focus on what we are doing here. And one of the pieces of research we put out was related to affordable energy on Indigenous reserves. And we hear a lot about water access, but there are lots of First Nations in Canada who live next to natural gas pipelines and communities with very affordable heat energy that they don't have access to. And they pay sometimes up to 3 times what everybody else is using to heat their homes with electricity or to heat their homes with propane. And Canada's own policies prevent them from using federal money to build gas-related infrastructure as well. So this same problem that happens in the developing world also has happened in Canada for First Nations. And so my final point is stop telling Africa what to do, and let's start applying some of those. Don't stop doing this and start doing that to the people who live in Canada and also want to have a better, more affordable life.
Well, there you go. Lead by example. That's a positive.
Yeah, no, it's a very positive. But I would like to engage people further and in making a distinction, because like we were talking about earlier, the issue of entrenched interest. There are entrenched interests out there, and it's up and down the chain, all the way from the politicians to the people working in the aid industry to some type of researchers. All of them, it's not in their best interest for the most part that the status quo changes, because they're benefiting from the status quo, and they've been feeding themselves out of the trillions of dollars that people staying in poverty has afforded them. So I would like to make this distinction between, on one end, the elites, the people who are in those places that I just talked about earlier, from the rest of the population. This is where the rest of the population has to understand that their contribution to this is going to have for them to stop being the mouth the mouthpiece of the other group. Because right now it's too convenient. They come out with nonsense and the rest of us follow them. Yeah, climate alarmism because of that. No net zero. All the young people of the world who think they're doing great, like Greta Thunberg, are just jumping on that bandwagon and giving them legitimacy. And we don't stand a chance behind that type of machine. So what can people at home do right now is, as they hear all of this, they have to be the ones who also help with changing that narrative. Because I don't think the entrenched interest will change just because. They will need a little bit of help from the rest of us.
Well, and that good lets me pass the hat for all kinds of groups, including Shannon's, because, governments have huge sums of money, a lot of these left-wing foundations, and so the NGOs and so on. And the dissidents often have very small budgets, and Canadians will give tens of millions of dollars to political parties, but you're hard-pressed to get them to give a few $100,000 to people who are challenging the thinking. Again, giving out Thomas Sowell books, but ideas have consequences, and bad ideas have bad consequences. And again, so I love the thought of leading by example, whether even if it's being active, not being active. And again, very briefly, but one of the things you did, of course, was start a factory in Senegal. You went and created the dynamic private sector growth. You have 1 minute to tell us why and how.
Because I'm just simply tired and heartbroken beyond words of seeing Africans, in this case Senegalese people, packing themselves into little fishermen's boats, trying to cross to Europe in search for a job from which income they will send back home to feed the family back home. And oftentimes the boat capsizes, and now we have thousands of dead people at the bottom of the ocean serving as fish food. I am heartbroken about that. That is just the most wrong thing you can ever think of. So if a job is what they went to seek, that, where they met their death on the way, then I'm going to give them at home what is it that they risk their lives to go get. So let's build jobs at home so people get a chance to stay at home and build a life at home. And kids like me would not at age 7 be stripped away from their grandmother to go to Europe to have a better life there. That's why I did this.
Well, there you are, once again, leading by example. And so I want to thank you very much for joining us on the program to help share some thoughts. It's a thing that people worry a great deal about and care a great deal about. And it's excellent that we can give them this new perspective that'll help them make a positive difference in a world where there's such a crying need for that. Again, thank you so much for being on the program.
Thank you.
And as we wrap up, speaking of ideas, if you were to recite or even maybe mention Rudyard Kipling's poem, The White Man's Burden today, you'd get the razz big time. You'd be canceled. You might be pelted with various objects. But if that's the case, let's be very wary of strutting up and assuming the green man's burden, especially when the results are as dismal as the approach is patronizing. It's the Climate Discussion Nexus. I'm John Robson. Thanks for joining us.